When Elena invited me, she asked me to do two things. And so I'm in a difficult position. She asked me to update you on what's happening in the United States and also to close out the conference. And I'm aware I'm the last person, so I will try to be brief on both of these. I've been saying for years that Americans shouldn't be allowed to speak at journalism conferences outside of America because our world is so different from everybody else's that I don't think we really help when we contribute. The conversations that you're all having about regulation are so thoughtful and so different from what we're having in our country. And now, since Trump took power, the gap between what we're thinking and talking about and what you're all thinking and talking about has gotten even bigger. I think especially it's very hard for us to hear people criticizing the EU or regulation or defending the platforms because that's not our world anymore. I think the first thing, of course, is that even before Trump, we had seen what was talked about in the first panel, which is the huge amount of polarization and the destructive role played by, Fox News and sort of unscrupulous media outlets that spread disinformation, aided and abetted by the platforms. And I thought Nathan Heller's piece in The New Yorker last November really summed it up because he said, it's not even a problem anymore of like algorithms targeting misinformation to certain groups. It's a sort of general fog of confusion. And I always think back to what Gabrielle Tardet wrote about the Middle Ages before there was the public. We had pilgrimages, fairs, pious or belligerent emotions, anger and panic. And that's really what we're seeing now in the US at the moment and have been for some time. So when Trump and Doge came in and Musk, it wasn't in a thoughtful way of we believe in the Enlightenment, we believe in science, we believe in government, let's sit down and try to fix. It was really an attempt to just destroy everything. And since I teach at Columbia University, and obviously I'm involved in the world of nonprofit journalism, I'm seeing sort of an implosion of everything that I have worked for my entire life. And so I think everybody is really in a state of shock about how quickly it came, how cynical it's been. We don't believe that the people investigating Columbia actually care about anti-Semitism. They made these plans long before Gaza. They wanted to go after the universities. They've gone after the law firms because they could oppose Trump. And of course, they're attacking science and health and journalism all around the world. So, as we heard this morning, it's really any institution that could be analytical, could be thoughtful, could be critical. So that's what we're living with. And it's silly to pretend that there's an ideology or a reason. It's greed and destruction, essentially. What's been also I think what has upset people the most, I think one thing is the uncertainty. So you never know when they're going to come after you. One day it's Columbia, one day it's Harvard, one day it's ABC, one day it's CBS, one day it's the law firms. So that unpredictability and uncertainty has people very worried. And then the other, of course, shocking thing has been the disarray of the Democrats and the capitulation. So when Weiss Rifkin, the law firm, said, okay, fine, when ABC settled $15 million, CBS, because, the owners wanted to they're trying to do big mergers, they're trying to do big deals, companies don't want to stand up against Trump. So that's been really, really shocking. And I think that Americans we're not used to this. So when I talk to colleagues in South Africa, they're much calmer. My own cousins and my Spanish students have been giving me advice, about how the universities were during the dictadura, but we're not in the habit of dealing with this stuff. And so I think that's made everybody very upset. And I think, hearing all these conversations about the platforms and, some of the colleagues saying, well, we can't blame the platforms for our problems and things like that. And I think two things are going on. I mean, journalists have been sort of criticizing themselves for years and saying this is our fault and we didn't make a product that people want. And, certainly to some extent we can say it's not really a supply side problem, it's a demand attention problem. There is plenty of great journalism out there, and if people are choosing not to read it, that's of course true. But I think it's really important to understand that the fight with the platforms isn't something that any of us wanted. They brought it on themselves, right? So it wasn't just that they stole the intellectual property of creators and that the AI companies are doing it again. It's not just that they have totally abused their position in the advertising market. It's that they went a step further and started meddling in political processes all around the world. So the campaign contributions that Facebook made to Donald Trump, Elon Musk going in and offering people whatever it was, $1 million to vote Republican. And then this, to a smaller scale, has been replicated all over the world. So, when Australia put in the news media bargaining code, Meta walked out, said we're not going to cover we're not going to have news here. They tried that for a few days and that backfired. They stopped carrying news in Canada. You've all experienced this in Spain with Google. Last year when we had like a bargaining code type thing in California that was proposed, Google said we're going to test dropping news, which they've been doing in Europe. You saw how they intervened in Brazil, in South Africa, when these countries have tried to regulate the platform. So they really they weren't content with being these incredibly powerful, rich companies, but they had to start abusing their political power. You saw TikTok in Romania, what Musk has been doing in Germany. So I think it's the sort of huge distrust they brought on themselves by their actions. And if you haven't read Careless People by the Facebook whistleblower, which came out in the spring, and the next day they went to court to try to stop the author from publishing it, I would highly recommend that book. So I'm, just a few more points. I'm co-chairing a panel that the OSCE has organized to look at viability for journalism, visibility, and safety. And it's really starting from the sort of view that the platforms have become so powerful in all of these areas that we really need to think about how we regulate them. And what I'm seeing globally is a real shift in the conversations about regulation, right? 5, 10 years ago, we were all talking about, codes of conduct, voluntary codes. And now, because it's been clear that the platforms won't actually abide by or respect political processes, everyone's getting a bit tougher. So I think this labeling discussion is super interesting. I don't think people would have thought about labels maybe 10 or 15 years ago. Now we're talking about prominence, visibility, must carry, requirements that the platforms cover, include and carry and distribute public interest news. Again, on remuneration, 10 years ago, everybody was happy if Google gave them a few $100,000 or a Google News grant or an innovation grant. Then when the bargaining codes came and they pushed back so hard, now governments are saying, well, what about a levy? What about if they don't do a bargaining code, they pay a tax? And we're seeing the French competition authorities also push back. You took this, you took the IP, you didn't follow the agreements that you made, we're going to fine you. So I think the policy discussion globally is getting tougher, but I think that the platforms brought it on themselves. And I think if they'd been a bit less greedy, they wouldn't have earned the enmity that they earned. So that's one sort of global observation that I have. I think there was some points before. I think it was Borja made the point that my husband used to make, which is nobody wants state censorship, nobody wants platforms. Well, what do you want? And I think in that discussion about the platforms, that's where we're at, right? Anu Broadford wrote that book looking at the choices. So you can leave them as they are, which is what America's done. And by the way, a bill to ban states from doing any AI regulation for 10 years is now being discussed in Congress, past the lower house. So you can leave the platforms as they are and not try to regulate. You can do what the Europeans are doing, which is saying we're going to have to do some regulation, but we're going to try to respect human rights as much as we can. Or you can exit and walk away. And if that happens, then probably Europe and South Africa and Brazil will eventually develop their own technology, or Indonesia. But until before then, they may just end up on the Chinese platforms. So I think we're in a world of trade-offs, very difficult time. Clearly, platform remuneration won't save journalism, but it has to happen. Clearly, journalism can't save the world from polarization. But I think that the conversations that you're having in this room, I think that all of these discussions about self-regulation, about labeling, about signaling, about governance are absolutely essential. I can't stand it when people say, oh, journalists got fat and lazy and never innovated, because I don't really know a sector that has innovated as much as journalists have. I think there's a constant tendency towards self-reflection, towards self-criticism, towards looking around the world and trying to see what other people are doing and what the solutions are. And I'm obviously so honored to be asked to make the closing remarks. And I was here last year, and I hope I'm here next year. I'm also estoy haciendo pasos para sacar mi pasaporte español. So bueno, gracias por todo y que disfrutes el vino español y el aperitivo y todo.